I'm Miwa Messer. I'm the producer and host of Poured Over, and Bryan Washington has been doing amazing things on the page. If you've read Lot, you know this. If you've read Memorial, which is really one of my favorite novels of all time. Yes, I just said that out loud. Family Meal, and now Palaver, which I feel like you've been walking around with this novel in the back of your brain for a really long time. There's territory and ideas that are sort of familiar, especially for anyone who's read Memorial, but there's magic in this book, man. This book is so glorious and gorgeous, and I I was mad when it was over. I did not want to leave anyone. Did not want to leave this book at all. And even if you're familiar with the earlier work, this book is doing something new, and it's not just the photographs. So, hi, I'm so happy to see you, but also, where did this book come from?
Thank you so much for having me on. I think we can like stop right there actually, but if we have to continue, I started it in spring of 2020, and it was actually a commission for the McSweeney's queer issue from
Okay.
Patrick Cottrell. So he is who is responsible and made it.
Okay, well, I love that guy too, so I will happily.
Yes, yeah, I think it's very important to say that. But I received an ask
Hmm.
about a short story. And this was in March
Hmm.
of that year when the US was just beginning to acknowledge
Right.
that COVID could be a problem. So travel situations started changing, and border situations
Hmm.
became more tenuous.
Yeah.
Uh, at the time, I was splitting time between Japan and the US, but I was not a formal resident. So I was gridlocked out of travel
Right.
for a little while. And I was missing friends in Tokyo. I was missing friends around Kansai. And I thought it would be interesting to have this sort of narrative between two characters that were in a sort of interstitial space
Hmm.
themselves.
Yeah.
Um, as far as their relationship was concerned. A narrative in which two characters were navigating like a physical space that was quite familiar to one of them and not so familiar to the other, but in the same way that they're learning how to orient around their own relationship, they're learning how to reorient their sense of
Hmm.
the literal geography in which they're in. I started it then, completed the short story, but I continued to think about
Yeah.
those characters in the months after finishing that short story, and it's usually an indicator to me that there could be something, a
Right.
little bit more filling there. But I knew even at that time that I wasn't quite where I wanted or needed to be from a skill and precision standpoint in order to achieve what I wanted to with that narrative. So I continued to take notes and write around it over the
Hmm.
next 3 years or so. And it was really, I suppose, at the very beginning of 2023, if not the very end of 2022, that I started working on it more earnestly and with a little bit more intention. But it still took some time. It's usually I'm fairly brisk with
Hmm.
projects. This is probably not even probably, this is the one that has taken me the longest to complete.
When you're talking about taking notes for a project like this, are you talking about space and play? I mean, there's a very specific feeling of place in this novel, and you do two separate things. There's a grounding in Tokyo and sort of the neighborhoods in Tokyo, but it runs parallel with what you were just describing as this space that specifically the mother and son are in, where they don't. It's its own little world. Their relationship is its own little world, and it's a high wire act in a lot of ways, right? Because we don't want to get totally lost in their experience, or at least I didn't want to get totally lost because I love the way you write about Japan. Your Japan and my Japan don't always overlap, which I love. And we're both coming at it from a very Western perspective, right?
Yes,
Um,
yes.
but watching the mother and the son, and I love those names. I'm so happy you didn't give them names beyond the sort of descriptives. Um, I mean, is that what you're thinking about when you're taking notes, or are you just sort of thinking, where does the story go? Who else do I need to play with? I mean, the cast is really great. I love a lot of these secondary characters because they're all very surprising. So, what do notes look like?
No, I suppose when I say notes, I am also talking about parallel projects,
Oh,
and
okay.
I'm
Okay.
talking about literal notes, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like literal notebooks where I may have a stray thought or I may have an observation that may align with one of the characters'
Mm-hmm.
perspectives. A big challenge for me that was ultimately resolved and only I think would have been resolved due to that just sort of like incessant like sort of like observation making and
Yeah.
note taking of course of those years was approaching the third person for
Yeah.
this narrative.
Mm-hmm.
The short story is in the third person, and that was quite taxing to pull off for me just
Okay.
because it's too much power, really, just the way that I think of narrative and the way that I try to inhabit a sort of like emotional weight from character to character. Utilizing the third person requires a certain grounding and a certain foundational sense of the shared world that characters have that can be taxing for me
Mm-hmm.
to occupy for a long time. So much of the sort of like foregrounding
Mm-hmm.
of the novel was trying to figure out what would this voice look
Right.
like, because it is the third person, but it's still there's still a speaker, there's still conversational ticks, there's still like a lexicon that is being utilized. So like trying to figure out like what that was specifically was a challenge, and ultimately I landed on something that was comfortable
Mm-hmm.
for me. I think it's like elucidated a little bit by the end of the novel,
Yeah.
but
Yeah.
realizing what that would be took some time, and also quite frankly just spending more time in Tokyo
Yeah.
was much of the note taking, so to
Yeah.
speak. Much of the time that I've spent in Japan has mostly been in Osaka
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
the surrounding areas, and that was started at this point probably just under 10 years ago, so like maybe a little over 9 years ago. Most of that was in Kansai, and I would have little excursions
Yep.
in Tokyo because of friends, or because there was an exhibit, or because there was like a film or something, but I wasn't really spending
Mm-hmm.
like extensive amounts of time in Tokyo. And when I was in Tokyo, I was almost always squarely in either Nichome
Yep.
or Shinokubo, with very rare, I suppose, moments in which I would spend time in other places. So my language surrounding the very specific vantage point from which I was approaching the city was still quite limited, even in that specificity. So a lot of that time was just figuring out how not only do these characters see this city, the son as
Yep.
a character who spent some time in Tokyo, and the mother as a character who is being introduced to very particular iterations of the city, but what even is my language
Right.
for this particular city.
I mean, I love the distance that the third person gives us. I I felt like your use of the third person brought me into the story a little more than had you chosen the first person. And I think it's partially because of my relationship to Tokyo, right? Like I know Ebisu pretty well. I know parts of Shinjuku pretty well, but like it's where your people are, right? Like, and also a lot of my experience of Japan in general really does date back to when I was much smaller and spending a lot more time there. So, as an adult, my relationship with the country is really different.
Yeah,
And I do like as much as I sort of feel like they're there's a lot that I do understand about the place, right? But then there's also stuff where I'm like, oh yeah, I'm just a New Yorker wandering around in Tokyo, and like, I'm really glad there's Romanaji everywhere because otherwise, like, I cannot read kanji. But then there's also a little bit of a homing pigeon thing that happens sometimes, depending on where you are, and as much as the city has changed over time, like I see photos that you take of parts of Tokyo, right? And I'm like, oh yeah, I know what that smells like. I know exactly what the cleaning products smell like. I get it. And it's like that little ping in the back of your brain, or you like walk off the plane, it's like, oh right, I'm at Narita. Like I understand exactly where I am and where I have to sort of move around in the world. And frankly, I don't like wearing shoes inside, so it works for me, right? Like I'm perfectly happy to leave my shoes. Like I don't want. But watching this mother and the son, and I think I'm going to focus mostly on them as much as I love all of the secondary characters, and they are a delight. But watching these two people navigate their fractured relationship, their complicated relationship, right? But also putting them in a place where, the son, he definitely knows more than mom, but he doesn't know everything, right? Like his students, he's teaching English, and you give him this set of students that are really excellent. And they're all kind of like, dude, we see you. Like we actually see you as a person. And he's a little shocked because in some ways it feels like this is the first time people have really seen him, and it's his students, right? Like, and they range in age and background and everything else. And they keep kind of calling him out on his stuff. And he's like, why are you doing what stuff? I don't have stuff. And it's really fun to see and have us be brought into like this idea that maybe he's not as smart as he thinks he is about some things.
Yeah, I think for me, it was really important to have the sun's trajectory shift from a moment or a period of relative isolation
Yeah.
to a moment or period of relative community without necessarily prescribing specific attributes to that
Hmm.
isolation or prescribing specific attributes to what that community could look like. It felt and it feels important to me to show that in the son's relationships with his students, with his friends at the bar,
Hmm.
with his various relationships, platonic or otherwise,
Yeah.
that this is how he's able to see different
Hmm.
reflections and different iterations of himself, really. And sometimes there's crossover in what those iterations look like, or rather, how he's able to receive those iterations, but sometimes they're not. And
Right.
so, over the course of the novel, his sense of who he is and who he can be and how he
Hmm.
presents, how he feels, expands.
Yeah.
The same is intended to be true for the mother in a different fashion, right? Like this is a very new place for her geographically, physically. The
Right.
architecture is quite different. The weight of the water is quite
Yep.
different. Just the silence in the streets,
Hmm.
the relative silence, and walking through Shinjuku, or walking through Ueno,
Yeah.
or walking in any number of neighborhoods throughout the city is just quite different. So that really informs how she's able to relate to the space, how she relates to Ben, how she relates to her son. So
Hmm.
she herself is also learning new things about herself, and her sense of who she is also shifting. So having these parallel moments of expansion of self for the mother and the son in the midst of their trying to figure out who they are to one another felt like it would be useful.
It's also a fun way for, at least for me as a reader, to explore being an outsider from a different
Yeah,
perspective, right?
yeah,
Like it flips the whole thing on its head. Because one, of course you want to be a fish out of water. Like that's the fun of travel, right? Like you throw yourself into a place where you're like, I don't know what just happened here. But familiarity is nice. And like if you've been in a place for enough time where it's like, oh, I know that's the good bodega, or who doesn't love a 7-Eleven in Japan? They're
yeah.
excellent.
Yeah, yeah,
I
yeah,
mean, listen,
yeah,
Lawson's is great. Lawson's is
yeah,
great, but I mean, listen, the 7-Eleven experience, highly recommend.
yeah. A lot of convenient tourism right now. Yeah, yeah,
Right, right, all of that kind of stuff. But then I have to remember to not eat on the street while I'm walking.
yes.
Like all of those little ticks, right? And sometimes they come back really easily, and other times I'm like, oh, right. Oh, yeah, okay. Um, and when I don't have my grandmother handy to give me Asian mom death stare, like it takes a minute before I remember to slow my roll, as it were. But I love watching the two of them navigate space and navigate relationships and navigate their sense of intimacy. I mean, that's one of the reasons I love reading you, is that all of your characters in some way or another are navigating intimacy. And I think we've gotten a little flip about intimacy. It's kind of like, well, of course, you're
Mm.
dating or you're whatever. And intimacy
Mm.
is actually a little bit of work, right? Like love is a little bit of work. Intimacy is a little bit of work. So watching family members struggle a little bit, right? Like we're supposed to automatically feel these things because we share DNA.
Yeah.
Like, huh?
Yeah. The trying to put that literal labor
Right.
at the language level between these two characters was also pretty challenging and
Mm-hmm.
something shifted from draft to draft. The core of the way in which the mother and the son relate to one another is quite similar
Yeah.
to the original short story, from short story inception
Mm-hmm.
to novel completion. But the literal vocabulary that is shared between them and that changes
Mm-hmm.
over the course of the book shifted pretty dramatically
Yeah.
from beginning to think about who these characters are and the world that they occupy in 2020 and putting finishing touches on like a final iteration of a draft in summer
Mm-hmm.
of 2025. I think that that was only possible because of those 5 years that I had spent learning who these characters
Mm-hmm.
are themselves, who they are to one another, who and what their senses are of who the other should be, and how that rift, I suppose, is traversed between assumptions that are made about
Mm-hmm.
this is who the mother is, this is who the son is, and who they actually are. The negotiation of
Yeah.
the extent to which someone is willing to do actual labor to understand who someone else
Yeah.
is really interesting to me on the page, but it was a little bit challenging to navigate.
There's so much of the book that's driven by dialogue. And I don't necessarily feel like it's more dialogue than other. It's just the way dialogue is used. It feels much more almost like a stage setting. And I
Mm.
just, part of me wonders if you've been reading a lot of plays, but I know you read a lot of literature and translation, and maybe that's part of the influence. But the dialogue does a lot of the work here. And it's fun to experience, and it's fun to see sort of this little dance that, mother and son are doing with each other, where it's like, there's a little bit of that, well, we have a shared history, poke, poke, but they
Mhm.
really don't know each other. And that to me is interesting, right? Like, I mean, a parent-child relationship is kind of a classic trope of literature, right? But you've given us two people who are kind of, they just, they don't know as much as they think they do. And that's
Yeah,
really fun to spend time with.
yeah. It was even for their titles, I suppose you could say.
Yeah.
Uh, it felt important to me, and it feels increasingly important to me to find different ways to create as quick of a shorthand
Yeah.
between the reader and the narrative as possible.
Hmm.
So, beginning a narrative with the mother and the beginning a narrative with the son, there is a very quick understanding that's taken place, whether or not the reader's sense or like an audience's sense of who or what a mother is or who or what a son is aligns
Hmm.
with who they are in Palaver. Like this is debatable, right? And that's not really
Hmm.
something I've control over. But there is a sort of intimacy that is immediately
Right.
attached just by way of those names. Much of the work for me of writing the book was honing in from this sort of like broad ideas
Yeah.
of mother and son to the specific iterations of who these characters are through their dialogue with each other, the
Hmm.
way in which their exchanges shift from locale to locale, the way
Hmm.
in which the son interfaces with the mother at a dingy little bar in Nichome is very different from the way he interfaces with her on the Yamanote line, which is very
Yeah.
different from the way he interfaces with her in Nara. Similarly, the way that the mother might joke or attempt to joke with the son in his apartment in Shinokubo was quite different
Right.
from how she'll approach him when they're on the Shinkansen, when variables of familiarity or variables of comfort or assumptions that you can make about what somebody knows or what they don't know. Do they know which direction to walk? Do they know
Right.
what etiquette is in a space? How much space are they taking up together? All of these things, I think, impact how characters relate to one another and how people relate to one another more generally. So trying to expand on that with description upon description upon description
Mm-hmm.
is something I admire, but I did not think it would be a tactic that would have as much value for me in this project as just giving the reader these scenes, just
Yeah.
showing them these interactions and allowing them to see how the world is changing for these characters, but also how they're learning one another through their interactions, actually talking and listening to one another, because that's also a trajectory at the beginning of the narrative. The mother and the son are just kind of like talking at each other, and
Mm-hmm.
as it progresses, they begin to listen, and that informs their conversation, but also informs how they approach one another.
Watching their guardedness drop is, I mean, novels are designed to show the interiority of any character, right?
Mm-hmm.
And it is actually joyful watching them, or I had an experience of
Okay, that's good. Yeah, that's good.
joyfulness watching
Yeah.
them, but watching them thaw and watching them, I mean, you put them through their paces. I'm not going to pretend that like a lot a lot happens in this book,
Mm-hmm.
but despite themselves, they end up sort of
Yeah.
figuring out this new equation, right? And it is kind of math for them though. It's like, well, if I do that right, every what is that thing from physics? Every reaction has an or every force me. I am not a math person. But you understand what I'm talking about. It's this idea that there are two objects in motion, right? And
Yeah.
what happens when they collide or don't collide. And I didn't want to leave these people. And I don't know what I was necessarily rooting for, right? Like I'm not necessarily like
Mm-hmm.
I don't know even now, and I've read the book twice. Um, I just didn't want to leave them. I didn't. And obviously the son has his relationship with his brother, and that's complicated, and the mother has her relationship with her brother, and that was like everything's
Mm-hmm.
slightly complicated, but it's so alive, and yet you've given us this distance. That's what I think. That's what I'm trying to say. You've given us this distance where we can sit with the characters and go through what they're going through, and yet we come out on the other side better for it. Is how I'm approaching
That's
it.
that's really gratifying to hear. I mean, I think for me, two things that felt tricky to approach, but significant at least to attempt for the novel are one, it's what you noted, right? Like the terror of a sort
Right.
of emotional honesty, right? Once you get past the sort of veil of like, oh, how are you? Like, oh, I'm good. How are you? Like there's nothing there. But when you find the language required
Mm-hmm.
to inquire about how someone is actually doing, and when they find the language that is best for them to communicate to you how they're actually doing, that answer can be pretty horrifying,
Right.
right? Both what is spoken, particularly if it's something that wasn't expected
Mm-hmm.
or intuited, and also what is received and how one feels that
Right.
like, okay, now I've been gifted in a lot of ways, even if it doesn't feel like that at the time, with the sort of like emotional honesty, or I've been gifted with like the sort of like lifting of the veil for who this person is. Now, what do I do with that? Right? Do I still approach them with my own sort of like iteration of like a clone
Mm.
of a veil, or do I also approach them with my iteration of honesty? And if I do that, will there be friction? Will they intersect with one another? Will they bounce off of one another? Much of the mother and the son's journey is attempting to lift their respective veils for one another, figuring out what honesty means for them, but also how they reflect upon and how they receive that
Hmm.
respective honesty, because this is a challenging thing, right? When you receive honesty from someone that you thought you knew and who you have not received
Right.
honesty from before, when the messages that you're actually getting are quite different. What do you do with that, right? Do you turn away
Hmm.
from it because that's more comfortable? Do you reject it outright? Not comfortable, but it's pretty clean.
Yeah.
Or do you attempt to navigate it, which is neither comfortable nor clean? But what felt important again to me, maybe the second thing, and this I think has been like a holdover from Palaver to Family Meal to Memorial and so on,
Hmm.
is have characters that even if they do not have the language
Yeah.
for how to come together or do not have the language for how to reconcile whatever it is that they're navigating. Characters who are constantly attempting that reconciliation and
Hmm.
attempting that movement together. Having the attempts serve as a sort of plot, so to speak, in and of itself. That's always interesting for me to read. And so it becomes a positive challenge to
Hmm.
attempt what that can look like on the page.
But also memory interferes with what
Yeah.
honesty is and what
Yeah.
intimacy is.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
you play with memory. And that's also something that crosses all of the books and the story, the novels and the stories. Um, but memory is such a tricky creature, right? And it does, even without necessarily thinking about it,
Mhm.
memory will shift. Memory impacts us, I think, in ways that we don't necessarily consider, right? And I see that so much in both the son and the mother and the way they're approaching things. And yet, unlike some other folks, they are attempting to figure out a new way of being in the world
Yeah.
together.
Yeah.
And that to me is kind of fascinating because they really are, in some ways they're trying to be equals. They're both trying to be people in the world, and yet there
Yeah.
is this very fundamental relationship where your parent is your parent and your child is your child, and sometimes they get reversed, but like it is a really basic kind of structure. And so
Yeah.
again, watching the two of them sort of figure out, the mother does remind me a bit of Mama from Memorial, the Japanese mother
Uh-huh.
in Memorial a little bit, which I find delightful because we're also talking about a Jamaican woman who decamped first to Toronto and then to Houston. And I love the idea that there's this sort of um, not blunt, but there's a very sort of, you know, there's that kind of mom who she loves you, but really it's not flowery. It's just not, it's just it's a very practical motherly love. And I liked meeting this mother and I liked spending time with her and I liked watching her figure out what she wanted because I do feel like as a character she had not necessarily been given that opportunity. It was like, well, you've got to go, you've got to emigrate, you've got to do this thing even if you're not sure. And then you've got to do this other thing. And now you have, and this is, all of this is very deliberate on her part, or becomes more deliberate, I suppose I should say. And it's fun watching that evolve for her because she's not expecting what she gets out of this trip.
Yes, I think for me, it was, again, really challenging, but what felt like it could be interesting was to have a character like the mother who is so grounded in
Mhm.
her current stage of life,
Yeah.
who has had so much experience
Hmm.
and so many different experiences, find herself in a geographic place in which she doesn't have a foundation, for which her bearings are useful, but also not really terribly useful because the city, because the environment is just so different from these tracks that she herself has navigated and these
Mm.
tracks that she's aware of. To have a character like her find herself in a position to where she doesn't really have a roadmap for the space or the relationships
Hmm.
that she has in the space, or even the relationship with the son,
Right.
with one would think would be the most foundational relationship. Even that is not set in stone at all. And
Mhm.
so the question for her becomes, okay, so what now? Like,
Right.
what do you do with it? Which I think is a kind of a horrifying question in a lot of ways, right? Like, if you have the opportunity to do anything, then what do you do? You know, that
Right.
can be a bit more than a little bit challenging. But also, it creates, I think, opportunities for not only introspection, but just sort of like expansion
Mhm.
of self and sort of expansion of who somebody thinks that they are and who they can be and what their life can look like, what sort of
Mhm.
relationships they can form. Having her navigate this sort of like third plot arc in which she's really just getting to know herself in a very
Mhm.
different way than
Mhm.
she would have if not for this time spent in Tokyo felt like it could be really fascinating, partly because I know that this is a city that can have that effect on people in the
Right.
same way I imagine you could say of most any city, regardless of whether it's New York or Seoul or Mexico City. You know, Tokyo does that to people.
Yeah.
But also because it felt useful to have a narrative in which she's coming to have a clear sense of who the son is. She's also having and navigating a new sense of who she herself
Mhm.
is. It feels as if though they both require the other, their interlocked trajectories. In order to sort of like accept and learn this new direction of the sun,
Mhm.
it will require her to have an expanded sense of like who she herself is.
And the son has made this kind of beautiful, messy life for himself, right? Like he has his friends at the bar. He's got, well, his boyfriend's complicated, but he's a nice man. He's a nice man. He's just complicated. Um, but he has a life that he built. And yeah, maybe it's not perfect, but it's his. He's got a cat. He's happy. Um, Slightly complicated, but he's happy. And I love the idea that he's been able to make a thing that's his, right? That there isn't, it feels to me like he needed to leave the States to have this world, that just he needed the change that comes with being displaced. And his life is kind of fun and charming and a little weird and sometimes hard and not perfect, but I don't know. There is some joy to it, and I'm glad that he gets those moments, right? Like it's not all just being caught up in his past, right? That he
Yeah,
that he gets to move forward, that he gets to have an arc of his own that isn't just in conjunction with his mother.
yeah. It's really fascinating, right? Like it's something that felt important to me. And maybe one other way in which this particular book was a little challenging is that I'm not particularly interested in autofiction or autobiography.
Hmm.
Um, for each of my books, someone has asked if I'm the protagonist for that book, as different as they were. You know, people have asked if I'm Mike from Memorial. People have asked if I'm the
Okay.
protagonist from Plot. People have asked, you know, if I'm either of the protagonists from Family Meal, and of course, you know, the answer is no, but also yes because you're the person, you know, who
Right.
originated these characters. For Palaver, what was challenging to me was not autobiographical transcription, which again, not so interesting, but trying to capture a sort of emotional experience and a
Yeah.
sort of like emotional logic
Hmm.
and
Hmm.
apply that to the page more directly than I have with prior works. Which isn't to say that there isn't and aren't attempts at emotional accuracy
Hmm.
in Lot Memorial Family Meal, because there are, but they are not the sort of like emotional points as closely woven
Hmm.
in
Hmm.
an attempt to reach one-to-one understanding as they were with Palaver. And that was challenging for me because it required me to approach the literal language that I was utilizing in a way that was both a little bit more distant, but also
Mm,
simultaneously a little bit more precise than I needed to for the prior
yeah.
works. In this way, I don't think that it would have been feasible to write this particular book in the first person from either the
Hmm.
son's point or the mother's vantage point. I think there was a certain amount of distance that was required that made it navigable, but that ability to move from emotional beat to emotional beat
Hmm.
was something that I had to train myself up
Hmm.
toward, and it took about 5 years to figure out
Right.
how to make it a sustainable
Hmm.
narrative, because it is, an emotional jump
Yeah.
for each of these characters, whether
Hmm.
it's the son for his past trajectory, his
Hmm.
present trajectory,
Hmm.
or the mother for her past trajectory, her present trajectory. Navigating those spaces for the course of 250 words as a reader is challenging, but navigating it as the author over the course of 4.5 years is
Hmm.
a different kind of challenging. So I think with each of my books, I've had to figure out as part of the process how to write that
Hmm.
particular book. And in this vein, the process that I've utilized from book to book has been quite different from one
Yeah.
another. I don't know that I would attempt to occupy the sort of emotional space that this book required, but I also know that it would not have been possible if I had attempted an iteration of this book for like a first book or even a second or third book.
Um, I do not disagree. This is a different reading experience, but familiar in some ways. Like I knew I was reading you. I was excited for a new iteration of whatever that meant because I approach every book that I get from a writer that I like. When I've read either people's entire backlist, which sometimes happen. I
Mm.
mean, if you've got two books, chances are good I've read both of them.
Mhm.
And then there are writers who have a much deeper backlist, and when you dip back into it, it's kind of like, oh wow, that hits really differently
Yeah.
10 years later. So I love the idea that the process changes. You also have added photographs of your own to Palaver, and I love these photos. They just even in black and white in a galley in not great on not great paper. Um, the images sing and they really work in concert with what is happening with both the mother and the son. And I'm just wondering when you decided that that needed to be because you've been shooting on film. I mean, I
Yeah.
realize you also shoot on your phone occasionally, but
Yeah.
you
Yeah.
do shoot on film and you have very specific ideas about shooting on film and it pays
Yeah.
off.
But
But I do think the images are a big part of the experience of these characters' story.
yeah, it was in a lot of ways. It's been important to me to note that FSG was like down with it from the outset, which is just
Uh-huh.
not the case for every publisher with this kind of thing because it costs
Right.
money to print these particular pages. It
Hmm.
costs money because it's different kinds of pages. It costs money because it's a lot more ink. It costs money
Hmm.
to retouch and refine the pages. And FSG's only thing was like, cool. Like, what do we need to do like from the
Hmm.
outset? So it would not have been possible without my editors and the design team that
Right.
work over there. But from the outset, I knew that it was something that I wanted to do, although the function shifted over the course of the years writing it. From the outset, I knew that the narrative would largely take place in Shinokubo and Nichome.
Hmm.
But for a number of reasons in the West, and to some extent in Japanese literature as well, the language and the sort of the codification of these particular neighborhoods
Hmm.
is not deeply foundational to one's understanding of place, which is to say that if I say or have a narrative that is set in Brooklyn, or if I have
Hmm.
a narrative that is set in Los Angeles, the exact iteration, will require some precision and will require some specificity, but there is some shorthand that an audience is probably going to bring to an English language text in a narrative that
Yep.
is set in pieces, whether it's tonally, whether it's sort of like
Hmm.
emotionally, whether it's just past beats of images seen in like this larger lexicon of film and television. Nichome and Shinokubo maybe not as much
Hmm.
for an English language reader. So like having literal images of what and how these places felt as if though they could be quite useful, partly because it's just less time that I had to spend on the page describing how a
Right.
place looked. Like I could
Hmm.
just show or have like a beat in this moment and then begin the scene, and then the reader is there with these characters. And also it was really useful for me, just like as someone who continues to think about how the page is utilized
Hmm.
and how space works over the course of a text, whether it's white space, whether
Hmm.
that is the space in a conversation from beat to beat on the page, whether that is just like a blank page, just sort of like forcing
Hmm.
a pause, forcing a sort of like cessation of movement. I wondered what it and how it could impact a reader's or an audience's sense of scene if we just have a two-page spread of like an expanse of
Yep.
Hatagaya. We just have like a two-page spread of an expanse of Higashi Nakano, or a different neighborhood that a
Yep.
reader just kind of like has to sit with over the course of a challenging scene,
Mm.
or light scene, or the sort of like transitional scene. So it was something that was nearly as challenging as the narrative in and of itself,
Hmm.
but for me from the outset, um, it became clearer and clearer that having intentionality with the images could be
Hmm.
one way to just reinforce an understanding of not only literally where these characters are, but emotionally where they are and how that changes over the course of the book.
It just adds to the world building.
Yeah, yeah,
And I mean, it's not the first time I've said it, but like world building is a phrase that we kick around with, genre fiction, right?
yeah,
Science fiction,
yeah,
fantasy.
yeah,
But clearly you've had to do it
yeah.
here, with a place that's very real, with characters that are very real. Um, but I want to talk about Ursula Le Guin for a second because she's been really a big part of how you became Bryan Washington writer.
Huh.
And you've taught, she has a craft book that you've also taught. And I just want to spend a little time there because to me, it's a really interesting influence. And I mean, she's Ursula Le Guin. Obviously, many of us have read her
Huh.
coming up and whatnot. And I'm not sure everyone thinks about the craft book. So I'm just
Yeah,
taking an opportunity to use you to
yeah,
remind people that the craft book
yeah,
exists, but also
yeah.
that it has multiple uses.
Yeah, 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 yeah. I mean, really, like all of her work can be read, for me at least, as an exercise
Hmm.
in craft.
Yeah.
The book I suppose we're thinking of specifically here was written with structure in mind,
Hmm.
with thematic beats in mind, with like
Right.
just the movement of a sentence
Yeah.
in mind, the function of narrative
Hmm.
in mind. And it was and is, I think, just so useful, partly because there is like a lack of preciousness by
Yeah.
which she approaches the text. I mean,
Hmm.
many people, when they think of like a craft book, or many people who read in the English language who live in specific parts of New York, when they think of
Hmm.
like a craft book, they think of like the Strunk and White
Right.
sort of like relation of like language craft book. And that's useful.
Hmm.
Le Guin's sense of craft and of narrative and precision, whether it is from her explicit craft book, whether it is from the name is escaping me right now, but it's like a collection of like her different blog posts over
Oh,
like
yeah.
just a gorgeous book. I think it's just at least as useful for me
Right.
in terms of just thinking about narrative generally and maybe like life more generally
Hmm. Hmm.
than that. Just the way in which she approached story
Hmm.
from a deeply, in some ways, didactic and in other ways just really generous
Hmm.
standpoint.
Hmm.
So just like a really just comprehensible standpoint and applying those ideas that she had to these fantastical worlds
Yeah.
that she puts on the page, and knowing that, the reason that we're able to see these is because of these very specific frameworks that she
Hmm.
herself utilized is just so useful. I think it really shortens, for me at least, the chasm between like the work of putting something on the page and
Hmm.
feeling perhaps at times that is not like visible to yourself, let alone to a reader or an audience,
Right.
and knowing that really it's very specific structural and foundational decisions that are being made, and you can do just about anything on the page. Her work really, I think, codifies that and continues to
Hmm.
codifies that, for me at least.
So speaking of work, have you started the next thing? I mean, I
Yeah,
realize Palaver is
yeah,
just out in the world now, and you've had a
oh,
couple of
yeah,
stories recently in the New Yorker,
yeah,
which it's always
yeah,
fun to see a new story from you in the New Yorker, but just
yeah,
wondering if I,
yeah, yeah,
there's that conventional wisdom, right? Like the
yeah.
start the
No,
new thing when the old thing is out in the world.
well, for me, there's nothing conventional about it. It's contractual. Like, this
Oh,
is a
okay.
two
Well,
book
there's
deal.
that.
Big deal. It's public information. This is a two-book deal. So yeah, no, I had to, like, contractually, I had to,
Okay.
something is due.
Okay.
But yeah, it's actually mostly done. So for me, I usually work on a few things at a time.
Hmm.
Palaver is kind of like a strange exception in that I worked on that whilst finishing Memorial and also the entirety of writing Family Meal and also like
Right.
a number of stories. So I don't know if I'll do that again. But
Right.
I have there are two book things that I'm working on. One of them is more done than the other, and the other
Okay.
I'm still kind of thinking through. But it's been useful for me to have something in mind, to have something
Good.
else that I'm continually working on.
So we're taping this right before the National Book Awards. You are a finalist this year, and you are in very good company across many, many fronts. We're all very excited. Um, of the writers that you are, I don't know, most influenced by or have sort of unabashedly loved, I mean, a lot of them have won National Book Awards. I mean, you could be in really good company. I mean, finalists. I mean, Angela Flournoy's been a finalist. Justin Torres is one. I mean, a lot of really interesting people have done interesting things.
Mhm.
Um, just wondering if you have sort of a specific memory of a writer that's associated with the National Book Awards who might not be you.
It's a pretty easy answer for me for this one.
Yeah.
Rabih, actually, Rabih Alameddine. There's like a
Uh,
direct line
yep.
from Koolaids, like,
Yes. Yes.
very
Yes.
first
Yes.
book to all
Yep.
whatever the fuck I'm doing, like right now. Like, it's like a very direct line, and his insistence and persistence upon doing exactly what it is that he
Mm-hmm.
is trying
Yep.
to do, from text to text, whether it was the novel that he was a finalist for the National Book Award like
Yep.
years ago, whether it is the current book, for which I feel very grateful to
Mm-hmm.
be in conversation with, in the same way that I'm grateful to be in conversation with Karen and with Ethan and with Mecca. Uh, Robbie's work really, I think, in a lot of ways, made and makes my sense of specificity possible and plausible. And as I think someone who at least is told in various publishing conversations that there aren't a lot of comps for what I'm trying to do,
Mm-hmm.
it is so tangibly useful, but also just sort of figuratively heartening to know that there's some other person who is doing specifically what they're trying to do and trying to make this iteration, this image of these worlds that he's forming on the page in the English language as clear and as, if not accessible,
Mm-hmm.
as inviting as
Yeah.
possible. And maybe that's the thing, right? Showing that there is not necessarily tension between accessibility and invitation to an audience or
Mhm.
reader. So I was really grateful to be co-nominated with Rabih.
I love that so much. I really, his novels are, they are so, they're snappy and they're sharp, and he's really, really good. So I'm
Yeah, he's really good. Yeah, he's really, and that, that
straight
that
up,
helps.
he's really good.
That really helps. Yeah, yeah.
Oh, Brian, thank you so much. I think that actually is a pretty nice way to end this show. So thank you again. It's so good to see you.
Yeah, thank you for having me on. Thank you, Miwa, for yourself, for you, and the work that you do. It's really foundational to just industry and also readers. So thanks a lot.
Thank you.
Hello, readers. It's time for another TBR Top Off. We're going to recommend a couple of great books to pick up when you stop in for your copy of Palaver. I'm Mark at my Barnes & Noble store in Cincinnati, and I'm joined by my book buddy Donald in Detroit. Hello, Donald.
Hi, Mark. Hi, everybody.
So I'm going to go ahead and jump in because, first of all, a new book by Bryan Washington is a 100% yes, please for me. I love the way that he tells very honest, very deep, layered stories. He peppers them with humor. He peppers them with heart. His writing style is so unique and lovely. I just will eat up anything that he writes. So I'm really excited for folks to get their hands on this book. But it did make me think of a new release called Middle Spoon by Alejandro Varela. It is a book that talks about different forms of love and what that can look like. And it's told through the narrator's unsent emails. In essence, this man has a pretty fantastic life. He's got a great husband. He has 2 children. He has a charming boyfriend in his polyamorous relationship that's going quite well. A pretty cushy life, all told, until that gets upended when the boyfriend dumps him. We spend the book in this charmingly insufferable man's headspace as he comes to terms with his worth, his relationship, his place in the world, and really what love means to him. And it also shines a very truthful light on a poly relationship, which in fiction we haven't read a lot of recently. And I love the way that he talks about how love and heartbreak are very universal. This book is a way to shed light on a relationship type that people may not be familiar with, that also acts as a mirror on how we see love and see the people in front of us, and how we maybe take them for granted, or maybe take ourselves for granted. It's fun, it's funny, it's deep, it is sad at times, just like any relationship. So check out Middle Spoon by Alejandro Varela. Donald, what do you have for us?
So, Mark, when I was thinking about Palaver and Bryan Washington and the amazing work that he's put out there and how unique his voice is, I really wanted to find 2 things. Somebody that also has a very unique voice, and that also can tell stories that fit into, kind of about people that we're not as well-known and comfortable reading literature about. And I find that's really important, that we spread our wings and really try to read about other people's stories and other people's experiences. And so in thinking of that, there was one name that came to me immediately, and that's Ocean Vuong. And so I'm going to recommend The Emperor of Gladness, his latest book that came out earlier this year. You might know him more from his book On Earth We're Briefly Gorgeous, and plus he's also a award-winning poet. But this book is also very personal to me because right from the get-go, our main character, Hai, is attempting suicide. And that is something that I personally understand for myself. And what's so great is right from the very beginning, again, no spoilers, we get this voice from a distance who calls out to him and changes the course of his entire life. Much like those moments in our lives where something just untoward happens or something that we don't expect happens can change the course of everything that we think we know about ourselves, about our community, about the people around us. And Ocean does a great job of taking that one moment and transcending it into not just a, saving someone's life, but taking it to a place where everything that happens to him after that is so much better than it ever could have been because of this one person taking that moment to say, don't do that. And, comes from a stranger. And so we're then introduced to this town of East Gladness in Connecticut. Our 19-year-old main character, Hai, is, again, standing on the precipice of jumping off a bridge. And what follows is history and memory and time and ghosts and all the intricate pieces of our lives that we rush through or don't understand that come very clear when you're presented with that moment of, do I even want to continue? And this book talks a lot about what it's like to make the choice to live. And what I love the most, and one of the biggest things that I love the most about novels is it starts off with a first line. And so every once in a while, I'll throw out a first line out there. I haven't done it in a while. But this one starts out with, the hardest thing in the world is to live only once. And that sets the entire tone for this novel, because he has that choice of letting his life go or living that one life in the best way he can. And through all these little side journeys and adventures and backstories and haunts and revisiting past wounds and people that he's known, he comes to know himself better than he ever thought he could, and forms a connection with the person who saves his life, unlike any I think I've read in literature in a very long time. This is a found family story that will leave you a bit broken, a bit alive. Like, you'll feel a little bit broken, but then you'll also walk away feeling very much aware and alive and eyes wide open to maybe some of the own choices you've made in your life and things that you want to change. And so, talked a lot about that, but it's Emperor of Gladness by Ocean Vuong. Again, if you're going to go to the store and buy Palaver, and that speaks to you, this is a story you're going to want to walk away with it as well. That is what I have for you this month.
Yes, 1,000 times yes. I think that might be my favorite book of 2025. Jury's still out. There's a few more books left in the year. But thank you. And that is all we have for today. Thanks so much for tuning in to Poured Over. Please make sure to give us a rating and subscribe so you don't miss any episodes. You can also follow us on our socials at Barnes & Noble. You can follow my home store at BN Westchester. I'm Mark. Donald, where can we find you?
You can follow my store at BN Livonia.
All right, everybody. Thanks for tuning in. Happy reading. Bye.
Thank you for listening. Poured Over is a Barnes & Noble production. To help other readers find us, please rate and review the show wherever you listen to podcasts.